That being northeast England, where it really has changed about. Positively spring-like at the weekend, 15 or 16 degrees with some sunshine. But today we've seen the wind change direction. It's in the east. It's off a very cold North Sea, so it's been very misty, and it's been drizzling for much of the time as well. That drizzly weather extending northwards up the eastern side of Scotland, mainly around the coast, because as you went further west inland, it did brighten up, and there was some very pleasant sunshine there too. Temperature reaching 11 degrees. Now the winds are going to be quite important over the next day or two. They're coming in from a rather colder southeasterly direction now, coming in off the colder continent, and they're also feeding in off the North Sea, so it will stay drizzly and misty down that North Sea coast, whereas further west and north you will get some hint of a brighter period. Well, tonight some clearer skies up in the north of Scotland to begin with, but then it will turn misty with some fog patches developing there later on. Indeed, anywhere tonight it could be misty, particularly over the higher ground, where there could be further patches of drizzle around as well, and again some drizzle right the way down the North Sea coast. Well, temperatures around the coast staying about 7 degrees tonight. Inland a little bit colder than it was last night, around about 4 or 5 perhaps down in the southeast of England. And you can see here that there's just a touch of frost perhaps up in the glens of Scotland, certainly in the Western Highlands, although I think most places will just about escape that touch of frost. Well, tomorrow's chart looks very similar. We've still got this large area of high pressure, but it's beginning to just drift a little bit further away, and it's allowing activity to come up from the Bay of Biscay, and more of that in just a moment. But to begin with, it will be a very misty start, particularly on the higher ground, but there will be a hint of some sunshine over northern parts of Scotland. As that mist begins to lift up onto the highest parts, it will brighten up in other northern and western parts of the country. I think more chance of some sunshine tomorrow, particularly around the Irish Sea coast, and generally over western and northern parts of Scotland. Now for central and eastern parts of England, again it will stay rather overcast, I think. Any drizzle though rather limited and probably confined to coasts and hills. And later in the day, probably late afternoon, there is a chance of some heavier outbreaks of rain, perhaps just returning to Cornwall, and I think some heavier bursts of rain continuing into tomorrow night. Temperatures tomorrow a bit lower, rather colder winds feeding in from the southeast, so we're going to see temperatures about 6 degrees